kind of comes to the top of my mind, that, you know, for instance, the findings that, you know, the peak flows shifted from late January to late December. Well, again, to managers, it's like, what do we do with that information? There's not really any resulting change that we can make. And that's the same with so much climate change information. We get all this bad news, we get all these changes, but there's not really, no one asked the question beforehand, like, okay, once we know this data, will that really mean that we can do anything about it? And if the answer is no, maybe those proposals should be ranked a little lower than if the answer is yes. And, you know, an example of something we can do is, okay, if climate change says that, you know, this habitat is no longer going to be usable for snails because they need a certain amount of moisture, okay, that means that we should make our predator-proof fence higher up the mountain, you know, and that's like something that's actionable for us.
I'll just chime in a lot of the conversations I have with managers. You know, there's a limit. A lot of it's about limits, right? There's limited budgets, there's limited time, there's limited manpower, and so if the research or if what we can provide can help those things get stretched to go further, you know, they're very interested in that. So, like, you know, just this is a different example, but the invasive species groups, like, they very quickly jumped on kind of using drones and things because this allows them, the same team, to cover so much more ground than they could before. And so the types of tools that can really expand the reach and the capacity of the researchers, that's one area where I see, like, people kind of jump on and really start to adopt these things. But I definitely, you know, think that there's certainly is I see a really dire need also for, you know, understanding what's going to be coming in the future to make these sort of, you know, better longer term decisions. And so, you know, I think it's kind of parallel, right? There's the applied, like, that's, you know, these little baby steps and jumps, and then, but it's also, you know, our whole understanding about what's coming and how all these things fit together. So anyway, just a few comments on that.
What about interdisciplinary, combining, you know, different sciences, so that we've been talking about efficiency there. How, or willing or unwilling do you think either agencies or universities are to act in that kind of way?
Well, I mean, if I can just address that, I think there is increasing interdisciplinary approaches, but I would go a step further in saying there needs to be more transdisciplinary research where it includes not just academics, but non-academics, program managers, policymakers, whoever would be relevant, so that from the very beginning of the research planning process, you are having these conversations about what's the ultimate goal, how will it be used, and then as you're doing the research, you're checking in repeatedly, or you're literally on the same team co-planning it so that it ultimately is a product that is applicable. And it was designed that way from the beginning and improved through the process for that purpose.
Yeah, Wendy, thank you. That's a really great point. And I'd even go even further and say that it would be ideal if the researcher could even incorporate in their work a plan for outreach for how their research is actually going to be used. Because a lot of times it's just like, here, natural resource manager, take this data, and then we are required or have the burden of figuring out, like, okay, now I have to talk to legislators about this, I have to make a press release, I have to transmit this data, where we as the natural resource managers shouldn't be the spokespeople for what a researcher is doing. They should just directly talk to the legislator, they should directly talk to the public, they should take on that burden of, you know, and that responsibility of doing their own outreach, rather than assuming that they're just giving us all that data and we're going to take it and run with it.
I have a question about that, because I do think there is like at least this movement or awareness here too. And what I was thinking when Wendy was talking was like a co-production model, right? Where in a sense, there's a lot of different terminology for that. But basically, yeah, the researcher and the manager starting to work together from the beginning and collaborating and sharing and whatever. So as the research is being conducted, they're both aware of what the process is, what the data is that's being collected, and what the product that's going to come out in the end is something that is useful. I personally, I maybe hear from the researchers would think it might, I mean, we promote outreach. There are definitely better ways to do it, but maybe like that level of outreach from a researcher to be the ones like calling the legislators or doing that kind of thing is maybe a lot more to tackle on to like a specific research project. I think maybe, you know, what you're saying that's coming to me is that there needs to be maybe a better defined outreach strategy with the partners that the researchers bring onto an award, so that there are organizations or people that can do that. That's a lot of different skill sets that kind of come into play with a project for one person to do. But yeah.
I can jump in a little bit. Recently, when we do big projects, we've been engaged with stakeholder groups from the community, and that's not always been the case. But a particular one, I'm working in Oregon now. We were meeting quarterly to give updates of what we're doing, answer questions with the whole community of stakeholders in the area, working with the state. They've got facilitators, and it's really it's a lot of extra work. Instead of doing science, we're answering questions and making presentations and traveling to talk about these things. But in the long run, it really helps, because by the time the report comes out, it's not a mystery what we're going to say. Everybody knows the result, and they can already start, thinking about what they're going to do about it. They're not going to be surprised when this thing, flops out of space under their desk, and they, get calls from, the neighbors or, other people, like, what's going on. But it's been a really, an ongoing process. And I think that's kind of the model that you need to work with, rather than just, like, say, work in a vacuum and then throw some science over the fence and hope somebody does something with it. That it doesn't really work in the long run. So the stakeholder meetings, help a lot. But as a government employee, though, we're not allowed to go talk to legislators. I mean, we can brief them, but we certainly can't advocate for, give us more money, or we want to do this study kind of thing. But we will go and speak to, a group of legislators if asked, about what we're doing. So yeah, stakeholder groups are kind of where it's at for us.
Yeah, building on what Steve and Emma both said, and I don't want to make a blanket statement because of what Steve was just alluding to, that each researcher's in a different circumstance, both in terms of their resources, but also the potential restrictions on them. For example, if they're a government scientist. However, I think there's a lot of creativity that could be applied. And Steve's work is a great example of that, in terms of and I've also, in my own work with the social sciences, thinking through that outreach at earlier stages before the final product. So having, for example, it be the sharing of the preliminary results is you going back to the community, whoever that community is, and presenting and ground truthing. So you're actually improving your final products by ground truthing the information and the findings to make sure that it's accurate and that it's relevant, and to get feedback on how those final products should look. I mean, there's a lot, and there's different stages, and I absolutely agree with, like, press releases and all of this, if that researcher or that agency has the ability to, just finding ways to get it out.
I can add on to that a little bit. We've been doing a lot of press releases and 2-pagers for our legislators, and one thing that we've been doing with the researchers that work with us is asking them to send a short paragraph, having someone on our team or interns develop the look and the visual outlook of the press release, and then having this iterative process between our team, the researcher, before it goes up to our admin for sharing out in these kind of legislative sessions. So in that way, the burden is shared, and it's not on one person entirely, and it gives that chance for feedback. And if there's misunderstanding in what the researcher is actually sharing with their data, that can be clarified within that iterative process.
Thanks everyone for some great information. Should we can continue on this path, or should we go to, we have 2 more Menti questions. And I know we end pretty soon, so I don't want to keep us on track, or we can continue in the same fashion, but
well, I just wanted to ask, besides these press releases and your stakeholder groups, maybe we could brainstorm other ways that researchers could have outreach, because I think that's a really practical thing that we can try to incorporate into some of these research projects, and move away from the idea that, you know, researchers are just these nerdy scientists doing the research and they shouldn't be just doing, you know, they shouldn't be doing outreach, but really realizing that, you know, natural resource managers are also trying to just do natural resource management and don't necessarily need to do the outreach too. So there's this gap that we have, unfortunately, out there of transmitting that to who needs to know it. And it is really a burden that we feel, where we just keep on getting all this information thrown at us about why the work that we're doing is important, yet there's no follow-up of, okay, you know, how do we transmit that to other people besides the chorus, the natural resource managers who already know that the work that we're doing is important. So yeah, I was just wanting to ask folks if there's other ideas on the forums to have that outreach.
This is a great discussion. It's not what I thought we'd be talking about. This is fantastic. But so just a couple of things that, you know, that come to mind. So one is, you know, that we at least tried pre-COVID, and we're doing this in electronic fashion now, but, you know, outreach to schools and talking to schools, talking to high schools, talking to these different people, I think is an important thing. And selfishly at the university, it's also a way to get people excited about, you know, geography and environmental science and come be majors and things. So, but the other thing, and again, in this sort of, you know, COVID world we live in right now, where people are communicating via, you know, video all the time, like it doesn't even have to be that slick, but like a well put together short, you know, video can be an incredibly powerful thing, and can reach so many more people than you otherwise could by slogging around and, you know, talking to different groups and so on. So I think that these, you know, types of media outlets that now exist are something that I confess that, you know, I'm not taking full advantage of in getting word out and such. And so I think a lot more could be done in that area and outside of my comfort zone. I mean, I would much rather be like screwing around with that camera than, you know, making a video about things. But I think that would be probably better to get the word out. And just on the topic of other things that could be done, I mean, I thought Christian Giardina's talk about, you know, these sort of cultural connections and this information, you know, that's an area that often I think, like, not lip service, but it is not as integral a part of the project as it should be in many cases. And I'm speaking from my own perspective here in the types of things that we do. You know, I know it's important, and I know there could be more done. And often my emphasis is on, you know, okay, let's get the data, let's do this, as opposed to bringing it into this larger context. And what makes Hawaii so special is, you know, the people and the culture and these other things and how this all links together. So not to get too off track, but these are additional areas where I think, you know, how at least my group works, we could do more in that area.
What I hear, this is kind of a theme, and maybe, so we want to tie it, you know, back to understanding and managing, you know, potential water resources, but it seems like from what we're talking about, storytelling is a big aspect of how we can get that information out. You were saying videos and things, like telling a story about not only how resources are managed, but how they're researched, how they're used within the community. Does anyone want to kind of comment in that direction?
So
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I had a very recent experience with grad school where my work was very transactional, but and not really publicized, but it was being put to use almost immediately because it was funded by the EPA and we were working with the state representative at the same time. And the state representative was asking the question, I want to know when the water will be flowing so that I know when to sample it for a bio. I know the water quality is changing. So we took that question and applied it to when will the water be flowing, tried to model that for them to give them sort of a tool to look at the entire watershed. And not to get too much off the topic, but without having to really publicize it, because the EPA had started with, hey, we have this potential expansion of the Clean Water Act, which didn't happen. So intermittent stream flow and how we might bioassess them. And they kind of already had done the initial work of reaching out to the state representative. And then they basically went on the hunt for a graduate student. And I don't know if that's a unique experience, if it's a land grant college particular experience, but it sounds very similar to what you guys are talking about. That didn't require a ton of outreach. Not that I love outreach and I think it's very important. But it sounded like they are now using kind of that assessment tool to at least figure out how ephemeral some of the streams are across the state of Arizona, I believe.
I think that's so incredibly important. I think it gets back to a few things, back to like the transdisciplinary concept or the co-production, like making sure that from the early on, the question or the research questions are being tailored to the needs. And then that personal relationship and the trust that's built through that time, because if the personal relationship is there, then there you have advocates in the, whether it be in the legislature or management community, but if you already have those relationships and you're not just handing something over at the end, then you have advocates within those communities for that work, and it already has a place, like it's already being welcomed into, like management plans, etc.
Yeah, what I was going to add is a recent, go ahead. Sorry, Angie.
I was just going to say, it did seem like, as much as I hate to have compliance driving everything, that did help a lot. So actually getting the laws in place beforehand did seem to be kind of important, or even just the hint that there would be this clean water rule that was added to the Clean Water Act was very helpful for our case and justification throughout.
Yeah, sorry. What I wanted to add was just another example of, we did a year ago a site visit with some legislators to fly over some of our natural areas in East Hawaii and kind of see rapid ohia death, damage, and talk about fencing and that sort of thing. And researchers from Forest Service came and talked about their research. And so it was like, a site visit type or workshop type forum is really powerful. And especially when you're taking people to beautiful places and they get a helicopter ride. So that's another opportunity for this type of data to really get right to people and have captive audiences.
It's so much different when you can see it, believe it changes people's perspective entirely.
Thank you, everybody, for continuing to have this conversation. Unfortunately, we're so short on time, but we did have like 2 more Minty questions that we wanted to give everybody. So we will have a chance to come back, but I'm going to attempt to share my screen again. And if you are still on the Minty, I think that should work.
The Minty will provide the workshop with some data that we can use. So yeah, sorry to steer us off a little bit.
Sorry.
So what is the top climate change adaptation research or resource management need that we should be addressing? We were already talking about this, but how do these challenges too intersect with non-science factors, funding, pandemic, those type of things. We were already kind of touching on some of those topics, but just kind of food for thought while we answer this question. All right, I like some of these answers so far. If you have extra things you wanted to add to the chat, you can certainly do that as well. I don't know, you might be limited to one answer on the Menti, but.
You can submit multiple answers.
Oh, okay.
Not on every question, but this particular one.
All right. Has everyone had a chance to put in the information they wanted to?
We might have to move to the next one anyway, just for time.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you, everyone. All right. So what are the most important next steps after this science summit? So it looks like you can choose multiple options here, and you can select up to 4 options, I believe.
Looks like we've had 8 responses. So let's see how many of us are here. We don't really have too much time. So if you're baffling on one, just go ahead and submit what you have, and then we can use the rest of the time to briefly talk about. I'm going to hand that over to Mike. Yep.
Great. So was there any last bits, whether it was from our previous conversation or if there's something extra anyone wanted to add before we go back to the main group and report out?
I just say that of these options on this last one, the ones that were most sort of attractive to me were ones where it's like, all right, what are we going to be doing about this? You know, like we need to now start doing things. We can't just keep studying this. Like, this is happening. We need to start doing things and making our communities, you know, more resilient and in a better place, because there's some bad times coming, and I don't think we're ready. So that's, you know, the answers that I was most intrigued in for this last one. I'll just say that.
So moving beyond research into, well, moving into actionable research and change in the community. Anybody else? I think we have just about 1 more minute, so any random thought, you can speak up now or put it in the chat.
I was thinking, like, a lot of our conversation, right, has been sort of about the action component, but what that actually means to this focused area of water resources. I mean, hopefully we can continue that after this summit. You know, there's a lot of, we learned a lot of great things. And so we have a couple different conversations going on now, our breakout groups. But so I think everything we've talked about could apply to any focus area right now, which is great. But yeah, how we do that. I don't know if Tina and Michelle have the opportunity to turn in their camera if they want to, but we are supposed to get a picture of our group. And if you don't, that's okay, but I might take a picture. But continue talking. Sorry.
Hi, if no one else is going to talk, I guess I will jump in again. Sorry to dominate a little bit, but you know, what I wanted to say is the number one thing that we need from water research is the question, if we protect this forest, how much more recharge are we going to get than if we don't protect this forest? And, you know, we have our fences where we want to keep areas protected. We have our places where we're trying to do weed control and all this, you know, management. We have places where we're doing replanting, and we need to know in the scenario where we do something versus the scenario where we don't do something, what is that difference?
Thanks, Emma. Well, should we let everyone have a break, Heather? And I think we report back in 4 minutes.
Yeah, sorry. I have.
That's okay.
Yes, that's true. I don't know. Do you need to put, does everybody have the link back to the main stage? Do you know where to go from here? Okay.
Good.
You can post it in chat too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I have things running around in the background. Sorry for that.
No, that's okay. Do you want to hang on just for a second, Heather?
Yeah.
And then, And we'll see everybody on the main stage. Thanks for all your participation and the great conversation. Appreciate it. And everyone's presentation.